Thank you very much, my colleague and literal neighbor, since the two centers, so to speak, Jewish and Ukrainian centers at the University of Toronto, in many ways replicate the situation in the homeland, since we are literally right next door to each other, and we keep an eye on each other in the positive sense of the word. Thank you for the therefore, my not having to mention some basic things, because they've already been mentioned, that is, what is Babyn Yar, and in what sense, what makes it significant. So we've just heard that. I'll just say very briefly that the subject of the book in question is not only what transpired during those dastardly 2 days of September 1941, but rather the volume consists of really 3 parts. The first part deals with Babyn Yar before the Holocaust and before World War II, because it did exist. It had a history, it had development, etc. The second section deals with the events of the Holocaust period in World War II. But the third section, which actually accounts for perhaps 2/3 of the 420 pages of text, so it's the largest portion, is really what we would call, to quote a Romanian historian about Byzantium, Byzance après Byzance, the third section deals with Babyn Yar après Babyn Yar, after Babyn Yar, namely how Babyn Yar has been memorialized or placed in our memories. And so it has specific chapters on oral history, on belles-lettres, cinema, sculpture, painting, music, and then the whole question of how it has been commemorated or memorialized. Today, I want to speak about really very specifically the site itself, the physical site itself, and how it has been treated and, as I say, memorialized since the first of the public monuments that was erected in 1976. Since that time, in 1976, that is, this was in the height of the Soviet era, there are no less than maybe 36 different kinds of monuments physically on the territory of Babyn Yar. And what I'm just going to say in a few remarks today, we're going to look at the most recent period, and that is the period that is from the year 2016 to the present. Why 2016 to the present? Because that was the 70th anniversary of this massacre and killing of Jews. And that 75th anniversary prompted a renewed interest in the question of memorialization. Not that it hadn't been memorialized before. Now, the first body to act in this year of 2016, actually began a little bit before, was not a body from Ukraine, not a body from Israel, the Jewish homeland, but rather a body from this country, Canada. That is the Ukrainian Jewish Encounter. This is a non-governmental organization based here in Toronto, and its mission is to deepen an understanding of, I'm quoting now from their text, to deepen an understanding of Ukrainian-Jewish relations over the centuries with a view to the future. And in that context, the the Ukrainian Jewish Counter set out in 2014, 2 years before 2016, to prepare a major week-long commemorative event to culminate on the 29th and 30th of September, those 2 terrible days. That is then the 75th anniversary of the Holocaust by bullets, as Babyn Yar has become symbolized, in contrast to the Holocaust by asphyxiation in the West. This Ukrainian Jewish Encounter-sponsored commemoration took place under the patronage of the President of Ukraine, who was Petro Poroshenko at the time, also under the patronage of the World Jewish Congress, and in cooperation with an incredibly wide range of government and non-governmental bodies, both within and beyond Ukraine. And the program here, I can pass this around and you can just get an idea of the extent of participation in this week-long event. And this week-long event had 4 aspects. 4 aspects: education and conscious raising among youth. So youth were very important, brought about 200-300 young people from all over Ukraine of various ethnic and religious background. There was a public symposium focusing on the results of the first draft of the book that we're looking at today. There was a commemorative concert at the National Opera in Kyiv. And there were the presentation of awards to winners of an international competition for a landscape design intended to transform the physical site of Babyn Yar into a sacred place of memory for future generations of visitors to this site. Again, hundreds of students, scholars, public intellectuals, musicians, artists, actors, landscape architects, and visitors from Europe, the Middle East, and North America participated in this week-long event. I'll pass these around, the full program, the program that went with the concert, and the landscape design. And if anyone wants any copies of these, I will be pleased to give you a copy at the end of this talk. Parenthetically, the Ukrainian Jewish Encounter started its work in 2014. It took a whole year. Finally, the government of Ukraine, the President Poroshenko, issued a decree in 2015 to create a national organizing committee. Its goal was also to propose, but this time, a state-proposed commemoration for the 75th anniversary. And that took place on the night of September 29th, 2016. The government, headed by Poroshenko, hosted guests from several countries, in particular Israel, Germany, the European Council, at a grandiose event literally on the site of Babyn Yar. So this was taken quite seriously at various levels. But what about Babyn Yar itself? That is the physical land. Would these ambitious commemorations that I have just alluded to on the 75th anniversary lead to a transformation of Babyn Yar into a place worthy of its status, if one can even use the term worthy, but nonetheless, as the Auschwitz of the East, that is the symbol of World War II's Europe's Holocaust by bullets? Now, at the very same time that the week-long commemorative events in Kiev that I've just been speaking about, sponsored by the Ukrainian Jewish Encounter, were taking place, so too, at the same time, were meetings being held that resulted in the formation of what came to be known, I can't remember these, that's why I have to write them down, the Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center. The Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center. Its goal was to build at Babyn Yar a Holocaust museum under the direction of a supervisory board headed by the former Soviet dissident and Israeli politician Natan Sharansky, and including 4 figures who were the project's primary source of funding. All of these kinds of activities cost money and cost a lot of money. And those 4 figures, as I've listed them here, aside from Sharansky, but the ones who have the money, were Mikhail Friedman, German Khan, Pavel Fuchs, and Victor Pinchuk. All 5 of these figures on the board were born in Soviet Ukraine. That fact, as they argued, gave them the right to create Jewish memorials in their former homeland, by now independent Ukraine. In reality, though, for decades, all but one of these 5 lived and worked elsewhere. The politician Sharansky, as we know, in Israel. The other 4 oligarchs, Friedman, Khan, and Fuchs, 3 of those 4, Friedman, Khan, and Fuchs, lived either in Moscow or in London, or as we know from these kinds of hierarchs, in both places if they're not on the French Riviera or on one of their yachts floating around. These are the kind of people I'm speaking about. The leading donor behind this well-funded Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center was the first on the list, Mikhail Friedman, whose business interests and wealth was, like the other 2, Khan and Fuchs, closely tied to Russia and closely tied to its increasingly autocratic leader, Vladimir Putin. In order to achieve its goals and to enhance its prestige on the international scene, this Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center, now very well funded, created an international scholarly council whose historical consultant was the respected Dutch historian Karel Berghoff. It also engaged the Moscow-based Russian film director Ilya Krzyżanowski, nice Polish name, who was known for his promotion of so-called immersive theater and audience role-playing. Now, immersive theater, audience role-playing, on the one hand, innovative, but at the same time, controversial artistic and performative practices. Now, while this Babyn Yar Historical Memorial Center was undertaking preliminary research and construction planning, or plans for construction, Ukraine's Ministry of Culture, also at the behest of President Poroshenko, commissioned the Institute of History of Ukraine at the National Academy of Sciences to prepare a proposal for an all-encompassing Babyn Yar Memorial Museum, or Memorial Preserve, which turned out to be the Babyn Yar National Historical Preserve. So now, what do we have here? But also, one needs to stress here that this Babyn Yar National Historical Preserve, under the auspices of the Historical Institute of the Academy of Sciences, its goal was to create a necropolis to honor those who were buried or whose remains were still on the site of Babyn Yar. Well, what do we have here? Within 2 years, 2 years after the 75th anniversary of 2016, 2 proposals. That's actually, in some ways, not too many for the world that we're dealing with. But here we have 2 proposals about how to transform the site. One was the Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center, put forth by externally funded international body. The other was put forth by the Academy of Sciences of the Institute of History of Ukraine through the auspices of Ukraine's Ministry of Culture. And that was for this Babyn Yar National Memorial Preserve. Now, as shouldn't be surprising that if there were two projects, there would be, at the very least, rivalry between them. And indeed, a rivalry did soon develop in which various stakeholders took sides. And who were those various stakeholders? Jewish community organizations and Ukrainian community organizations and their spokespersons in Ukraine, Ukraine's governmental bodies, public intellectuals and the media, both within Ukraine and beyond Ukraine, and the larger Jewish and Ukrainian diasporas, including here in Canada. Rivalries being rivalries, also not surprising, pretty quickly turned acrimonious. In particular, after the Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center announced the proposed design of their artistic director, Ilya Krzyżanowski. His goal was to create an atmosphere of hyper-reality in which the visitor, interacting with various monuments, would experience exceptional thoughts, exceptional emotions. Krzyżanowski's design provoked a barrage of criticism, in particular from Jews within Ukraine, beyond Ukraine, one of whom wrote for the Wall Street Journal an article entitled Ukraine's Holocaust Disneyland. Ukraine's Holocaust Disneyland. So egregious were Krzyżanowski's plans that in April 2020, the National Center's academic director, Karl Berchow, publicly resigned, explaining, and I quote him, "I used to sense the project had a moral compass, but that is no longer the case." Now, for its part, the other project, the Academy of Sciences Institute of the History of Ukraine, undertook comprehensive revision of its proposal. And finally, in 2021, under the title Concept for Memorialization of Babyn Yar National Historical Memorial Preserve, we're in the Slavic world, so every title has to be terribly long. Nothing can be said quickly. This historical institute concept called for the creation of two museums, one devoted specifically to the history of Babyn Yar and to all its victims, and the other devoted to the Holocaust, not only in Ukraine, but also throughout Europe. So there are these two, then, projects. I'll pass this around because this is a rare copy of that proposal. Central to this proposal was a memorial park, drawing on ideas from the 2016 Ukrainian Jewish Encounter International Landscape Design, which was under the auspices of the International Commission of Architects in Paris. So this was at the highest level. That's that one brochure that I handed out. It was actually this one here. And they're all there. There were 4 winners in the end. The point is, they were concerned with a situation in which the physical site of Babyn Yar killing grounds would become a sacred space, a necropolis. You know, you're not even allowed to walk on these lands. Meanwhile, in the midst of the growing controversy over memorialization of Babyn Yar, the political scene in Ukraine changed radically. The results of the presidential elections in May 2019 brought a new head of state to the country, which we all know about now, Volodymyr Zelensky, and his servant of the people political party that came to dominate the parliament. And the new powers in control of Ukraine's presidency and parliament, not surprisingly, changed the dynamics of the Babyn Yar debate. Well, what was the debate? What was the heart of the differences? Well, it revolved around several issues. Should this memorialization focus solely on Jews or on all peoples who perished at Babyn Yar during World War II? Should the focus be solely on the Holocaust period or on all the tragedies that occurred at Babyn Yar? Because there were tragedies before and after. Should the memorialization be primarily conceived by Jews, or should experts, regardless of their ethnic or religious background, be involved? And perhaps most sensitive of all, should the project be under the control, didn't make a difference what the funding source is, should the project be under the control of Ukrainian governmental and scholarly bodies, or under the control of those putting up the funds? Classic problem. Who makes the decisions? The one who pays, the fiddler, or not? Now, since the Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center was being primarily funded by one person, I mean, we had, Sharansky wasn't putting in any money here, but certainly Friedman, Khan, Fuchs, and Pinchuk, but it was really Friedman, Michael Friedman. And since his investments were tied largely to businesses and financial institutions in the Russian Federation, now this Babyn Yar memorialization controversy was reduced to a simple dichotomy. The Russian project versus the Ukrainian project. The Russian project versus the Ukrainian project. Now, the spokespersons for both projects turned to President Zelensky and to Kiev's mayor, Vitaly Klitschko, for endorsement. By the way, why to the Kiev mayor? Because the land is owned by the city of Kiev. Right? So they do have a role to play here. Jewish activists in Ukraine were divided on this matter. Several religious and secular organizations supported the Russian project, while others, calling themselves Ukrainian Jews, expressed support for the Ukrainian project. Speaking on behalf of civil society, no less than 800 intellectuals in Ukraine, fearing Russian ideological influence over the Babyn Yar memorialization, expressed adamant opposition to the Russian project. The most representative diaspora organizations themselves took sides, with the World Jewish Congress chairman, Ronald Lauder, seeking to find an accommodation with the Russian project, and the World Ukrainian Congress chairman, Paul Grod, pledging support and funding for an alternative Ukrainian project. And what about the new government leadership in Ukraine? To be sure, Russia's invasion of Ukraine a second time, or the second phase of the war, which which began in 2014, but now in its second, more aggressive phase, that began on the 24th of February 2022, became a profound turning point in modern Ukrainian history. And it's in that context that it is necessary to note that there was a President Zelensky before February 24th and a President Zelensky after February 24th. Already before this second phase of the war, Zelensky accepted the principle that any memorialization at Babyn Yar should be carried out as a joint venture of the state and of the private sector. That's nice, but it was never made clear as to how much control either of those two parties would have over the conceptualization and the implementation of any future project. Now, it is true that the Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center certainly had enough financing to pay for the entire memorialization and more. Consequently, the Zelensky government concluded a memorandum of agreement with which of the two? With the Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center. That is the Russian project. All efforts of the Academy of Sciences Historical Institute, with the help of the Ukrainian Institute of National Remembrance, seemed now for naught. That's the project that is floating around here. 5 years now go by. We now are on the eve of the 80th anniversary of the 1941 massacre, and that then prompted a new flurry of activity on the eve of the commemorative date, which then would be 29-30 September 2021. The Ukrainian Institute of National Remembrance, his director was an outspoken supporter of the Ukrainian project, organized a solemn commemorative ceremony on the evening of the 29th of September, that is the first day on which Jews were shot dead. And this is the program for that 80th anniversary celebration, or commemoration. These are not celebrations, excuse me. Meanwhile, the Russian project had originally planned to complete its Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center by the time of this 80th anniversary. Of course, because of the war and all other things, even without the war, that was never achieved. But it did manage to erect some, as it was called, interactive monuments. And to stage in early October 2021 a Krzyżanowski transformative performance. I remember walking there and hearing these crazy sounds echoing off the ravine. Then, of course, came 24th of February 2022 and Russia's invasion, second invasion, full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Everything changed. The leading financial backers of this Russian project, Friedman, Khan, Fuchs, soon publicly compromised, put on all kinds of lists by the West. In such circumstances, one might assume that neither President Zelensky or any subsequent government would allow a project connected in any way with Russia to operate in Ukraine. And yet, as the Russian-Ukrainian war raged on, President Zelensky met in October 2022 with the chairman of the Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center, that is this Natan Sharansky, also together with the chairman of the World Jewish Congress, Ron Lauder, former U.S. Senator Joe Lieberman, and the last of the original 5 oligarch financial backers, Viktor Pinchuk. and one of Ukraine's chief rabbis, Yaakov Dov Bleich. Urged by his closest advisor, Andrei Yermak, the president Zelensky reaffirmed his support for the implementation, for all intents and purposes, of the Russian project. He made it clear that, to quote, "We," referring to the Ukrainian government, "have not forgotten, and we definitely must realize this Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center or Russian project." Now, despite Ukrainian government's ongoing inclination toward the Russian project, the Historical Institute's Ukrainian project does remain a viable alternative whenever Ukraine returns to a modicum of peace and stability. Well, since that is not likely to occur soon, one must, however sadly, repeat the words of one of the authors in this volume, Vitaly Nachmanovich, quote, that even such a distinguished place of memory as Babyn Yar has still not been commemorated in a worthy way. Thank you.